Of the more than 58,000 killed in Vietnam, roughly 25,000 were 20 years old or younger. Their service in the military was their first experience away from home. They were still boys who, until enlistment, lived at home. When the boy was killed, the memories of the first fight with his sister, the loud argument with his parents, the final sound of the door being closed as he left for school were still fresh in the family's minds. But unlike all the days before, this time he never came home. His dreams died, and his family's hopes and plans for him died as well. While all the war deaths, disappearances, injuries, and traumas were tragic, for the Gold Star families, the deaths of recently departed sons and husbands ripped into their hearts.
His last letter he wrote to me was, "It's hard for me to accept because that was the day that he died, and it was just a few minutes before everything happened." And he wrote and he said, "Sister, when I come home, I want to live with you and your family. Please." And I said, I never got a chance to write back to him to say yes. Next thing we knew was a car drove up.
How did you hear about your brother's death?
My parents, they were attending a wedding in Honolulu, and how they found out was there was a priest waiting for them at the airport to tell them about the casualty.
I was the youngest one, so I was like 6 years old. Plus they brought him home on her birthday. So that wasn't very good. It brings great memories, you know.
I feel their pain, and after 40-some years, it's still very painful for them. They lost their best friends. They lost, many of the Gold Star families, the sister will say, "He was my best friend." The daughter will say, "It's been 40 years since anyone's even mentioned my father's name."
After the Army notified you of your brother's death, did they come forth with any suggestions for grief counseling or any other assistance to help you deal with the tragedy?
We didn't have any help. I mean, we just mourned on our own, and it took us a while, especially my mom, because losing your child before you, I think it was the hardest for her to deal with it. And no one was there to give us support. It was just the families who were giving us support, and friends.
Other than a chaplain and an officer delivering the tragic news of death to the families, no formal channels or support groups existed for the families to deal with their tragedy. The families suffered their grief and endured their pain on their own.
Well, I know how they feel because when I came home, I saw a fellow graduate from my high school class, and the first thing he asked me, "I haven't seen you for quite a while, where have you been?" And he wasn't even aware that the Korean War was going on. It was truly the forgotten war. So I know how the Vietnam veterans feel, how they were totally ignored.
10 years after the last Maui boy and 7 years after the last American soldier was killed in Vietnam, the Vietnam Memorial was dedicated in Washington, D.C. The loneliness of solitary suffering started to change in 1982. On 13 November of that year, thousands of veterans flocked to the wall on Dedication Day, along with a handful of spectators, and it spawned an increasing awareness of the Vietnam veterans' plight, the unhealed wounds from the war, and the unrequited grief of both veteran survivors and Gold Star family members. The day was cold and drizzly, and the scene was heart-wrenching. The honoring and recognition of the service and sacrifice of our Vietnam veterans grew from those somber beginnings. Other private organizations sprang up in the shadows of the memorial with moving walls and permanent replicas that served and still serve as rallying points for reunions and commemorations. But Gold Star families were largely left out, as there was still no method to humanize their beloved sons, husbands, and daughters other than to etch a name on paper.
I just want to make sure that the Vietnam veterans are not forgotten. And they had a terrible tragedy bestowed upon them that they have never gotten over. And we all know how the Vietnam veterans were treated when they came home, living or fallen.
Enter the Vietnam Veteran Memorial Fund and the creation of the virtual wall of photos. This work to humanize the Vietnam fallen heroes by collecting photos and associating them with names has been driven over the last few years by volunteers and a small staff. Jana Hohen, a Maui resident, has taken on the challenge of assuring that all the names on the wall, regardless of the state of origin, have faces matched to those.
I have found over 5,000 photos now posted to the Vietnam Veteran Memorial Fund website. They'll be displayed in the museum when it opens. And I'm searching. I'm going to keep searching until we find the last one.
Jean, what has the work done by Jana and the VVMF meant for you?
The people forgot about the families, the person that died, and in the war, and she brought back memories, And before you go to the war memorial, there's a memorial of names of the names of who died in the war. All you see is names. Now she put a picture with the name. Now people know who gave their life for the war.
Jana, what is being done now to get the education center in place for visitors?
We have raised over $50 million now for the museum, but we still need $50 million more to be able to even start. We have the property between the Lincoln Memorial and the Vietnam Wall, and hoping that that last $50 million is going to come in so we can get started on the building process.
How did your son get involved in the military?
Well, Dave always liked building model airplanes. And when he got a little money ahead, he'd even get little engines for them and fly them. And they'd crash, and he'd go out, gather them up, put them together again. He always wanted to fly. So when it got time, he flew to Honolulu to try to join the Air Force. Found he had a heart murmur and a couple of other health things that he couldn't join. And knowing that he was going to be drafted soon, he decided to go into what he wanted. He got into helicopter maintenance. He went to school. I wish I could remember the name of the base. And before he left for that, he married his sweetheart, April Calhoun, from Maui. They had a baby while he was still there in training. And before he was told he had to go, he brought his family home to Maui. And the Army didn't change his address. So when we did get the news that he was killed, his body was left in an aircraft in a coffin on the air base here in California.
At Travis?
Travis, I think, I couldn't remember the name of it. And it was several days before they found out where his family was. And that's when we got the news. Yeah. I was with the Easter Seal Society at the time, and after I was finished there, I did some grocery shopping, and when I came home, here was an Army vehicle and the minister's vehicle, and they were waiting in the carport for me. And it was really a blow, mostly because I had stopped worrying about him. He was coming home. He'd said, you have to go over here and get your discharge papers. And they flew him on a helicopter, and on the way back, they flew over a no-fly area. This was during the peace talks. And that's when they were shot down.
When we respect the veterans and families, it creates dignity. When we honor those who have served, it imparts pride in service and country. And when we care, it allows healing and recovery for all of those who have suffered loss. We share a duty to repay the sacrifices with all three: respect, honor, and caring.